Okay, so there is a video released by Sandy Hook Promise, which is sort of, as I understand it, a parents group from people caught up in the Sandy Hook massacre 4 years ago. But they've released this video that's simply entitled Evan, and it's only about 2.5 minutes long, and it's there's been a lot of discussion about it. I have to say, without wanting to get into hyperbole, it's one of the most powerful ads I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of advertisements. Um, I honestly felt there was power behind the message in this, and I had to look at it several times. So basically, this will be a spoiler, by the way, if you haven't seen the ad. But basically, in this, it shows a high school kid, and he kind of sees his message on a desk, and he writes back, and he sort of has this pen pal through scratching on the desk, a girl, and it's kind of like a love story, and there's nice, pleasant music playing in the background, and that's it. And you kind of think, okay, well, what's this leading to? And my initial thought was that the focus was going to be on this young guy, but towards the end of the video, like in the last 30 seconds, they say that whilst everyone's focus was on these two, and it sort of ends up with the sort of the end of term leaving do, people signing books and so on. And he meets a girl and her friend who had been writing to him. That's all pleasant. You think, okay, teen love story, great. But then the catchline is that whilst everyone is focusing on this situation, there's another student in the background, and they then replay the whole thing, and it's chilling, quite frankly. And the other kid is in the first clip, he's reading what looks like an ammo magazine or gun magazine. Another one, he's watching footage from what looks to be some sort of shooting range. As Evan is going through his web space, he just passes over this other guy posing with a gun, and basically the catch is at the end, gun violence is preventable when you know the signs. But what actually happened was at the very last second, just as the meeting between the couple sort of rounds up, the other guy comes into the school with a gun. It also shows him being bullied in the corridors. But because he had deliberately been in the background throughout the whole interplay, you do miss it completely. I think there's very few people got that the first time. So from that point of view, it's a clever ad that you have to watch twice in order to get the gist of it. It had quite an impact on me. Hasn't changed my thinking at all, because if anything, it solidified my thinking. Um, when it comes to gun issues, I am 120% on the side of common sense regulation. Um, Sandy Hook was obviously one of the most notorious examples, but there have been a long history, and actually going back way before Columbine, of high school shootings in America. Um, but Columbine was, I guess, a turning point. And there's sort of a stereotype around this. It is kind of the kid that stands out who's being bullied, who then takes usually his. I've never heard of a girl doing it, but you know, yeah, usually takes his revenge out on the school by shooting them up. Now, the catch of this ad was the warning signs are there, and the warning sign obviously was that this kid was focusing on the problems that he was obviously facing, being bullied, by focusing on guns as a format to unleash his anger or whatever you want to describe it as, and that ends up in a massacre. There's a lot of issues involved in this, but the point I would make is mental health problems and bullying exist all over the world. Okay, you get bullying in every country, and it's a scourge. It's a terrible thing. But you do not have the level of gun violence that America experiences in every country. Now, that is a basic fact. It's a simple, basic fact. Um, when I say I support gun regulation, the problem with this is it's one of those debates that gets so polarizing that people don't stop to actually think what the other person is saying. So when people advocate gun regulation, in the majority of cases, they're absolutely not advocating banning all guns. Even if that was the case, which it isn't, it wouldn't be practical. You can't just ban all guns. There wouldn't be enough law enforcement officers to do that. It would be crazy. It would be unworkable. Hillary Clinton got a lot of slack during the campaign because she's been very strong on this issue. It's one area I have to admit I respect her on. She's been consistent on it, and in my opinion, brave. I say brave because there are powerful forces like the National Rifle Association, which basically, from my perspective, scare people. They say that gun regulation, pro gun regulation politicians are going to take away your guns. And the thing is, because this is so deeply entrenched in American culture, especially in certain states like Texas, Arkansas, Arizona, then it really does scare people into thinking, well, okay, they're going to take away your guns. And not only is that a violation of the Second Amendment, but that means then criminals are going to be able to do what they want. But the irony about this is by opposing common sense regulation, all that does is make it easier for criminals to get their hands on guns. And I don't want to go off too much into other areas, given that this video was about shootings in high school. Um, I just can't comprehend why anyone would take issue with common sense regulation, i.e., people who are mentally unstable or domestic abusers or who have a history of violence, making it harder for them to get firearms. I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that. Um, I've seen no example, honestly, I've seen no example of someone trying to take away guns from law abiding citizens. And personally, if I was a legislator in the US, I wouldn't propose a policy that said, oh, hunters can't have guns or people cannot have firearms for protection of their family. But quite clearly, there are certain situations that are going on which are absurd. In my opinion, for example, open carry or concealed carry, any sort of carrying a firearm in public, to me is a recipe for disaster. Because all it takes is one argument to get out of hand, then a gun comes out and you have a Wild West situation. To me, it's madness, but that is just my opinion. Um, the like I say, this is a polarizing issue. I'm well aware of that, and it gets to the point where people get so, in my view, paranoid about gun regulation that they go to the extent of slandering victims of gun violence and saying things like Sandy Hook's all one big conspiracy, which I think is disgraceful. But people need to really, really think about where they are getting their information. And I know it isn't just the NRA, but the NRA is a prominent example. Now, in the end of the day, the NRA is a business. They will preach about protecting gun rights and being Second Amendment zealots. Actually, if we're talking about the Second Amendment, it was about a well regulated militia. I am pretty sure the founding fathers did not have in their mind that every man, woman, and child in America could have any firearm they wanted. I'm fairly sure if we got a time machine and went back to the 1780s, that is not what they had in mind. And I'm somewhat concerned about Trump's attitude to this and the fact that most of the Republican Party have the attitude of, well, it's a problem, but we're just going to bury our head in the sand. And we're going to blame other problems like mental health and so on. The thing is, those issues, like I say, exist in other countries. When you add guns to the equation, when you make it easy for people to get guns, then it's just inevitable that you're going to have higher rates of gun violence. And people say, oh, but what about controlled cities where you have no gun zones and you have gun violence? Um, this is something, admittedly, I need to look more into, but those gangs have to get their guns from somewhere in the first place. And I think it's very plausible that they are bringing those guns in from states which do have more lax gun regulations. Common sense dictates that a member of the Bloods or the Crips or the Aryan Brotherhood or whatever, any other gang, isn't going to be able to go into a gun shop with rigid background checks and be able to easily buy a firearm. So they're getting those guns from another source. Now, there will be people who say, oh, but criminals are going to get guns anyway. Well, put it this way, if you had a pandemic, would people really say, oh, well, let it run its course? It's going to happen anyway? No, they would be demanding government action. So, what's the difference? I also reject analogies with cars. Like, oh, people die from road accidents every year, so why don't we ban cars? Well, firstly, cars are designed foremost as a mode of transport. Guns are designed to kill. It's a simple fact, and that shouldn't be contentious. I um, I fully appreciate that there is a culture in the United States with gun ownership. I fully appreciate. Hell, if I lived in America, I would possibly be a gun owner. I'm sure it's a great pastime shooting up and firing ranges and all the rest of it. And if I had a young family, I would want to protect them. So that really isn't my issue. Um, my issue is with gun extremists, people who really do seem to worship firearms above anything else. And they get to the point of being totally paranoid, and to me they seem to be in a siege mentality, whereby everyone is the enemy, and anyone with a different point of view is some sort of communist trying to take away their guns. It's crazy. And unfortunately that seems to be quite strong in the trajectory of this debate. So I am pleased that this ad has been released. I think it's striking. I don't think it's going to change a great deal. It might. That's the problem. It runs the risk of preaching to the converted, in a sense. But in this situation of, for example, a high school context, of course they should be gun free. Donald Trump said after the Paris attacks, oh, well, if they were armed, it wouldn't have happened. Bullshit. Bullshit. There's zero evidence to show that. The only example that there has been any sort of semblance of that happening was the Killeen massacre in Texas, where one of the victims, she managed to protect herself and shoot one of the attackers, but 19 people still died. It didn't stop the massacre. Um, there's just no evidence that arming everyone would prevent massacres. To me, all that does is create a Wild West situation. Um, and there is no easy answers. I'm not saying gun regulation will automatically end gun crime, but it just seems to. I put it this way: I don't understand why a law-abiding gun owner would have any issue with gun shops asking for background checks. What is so unreasonable about that? I'm just thinking out loud here. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. I'm not trying to impose my views on anyone. I will say though, as much as I have a affection for the United States, I am pleased that I live in a country where this is not a problem. And it's not because the government doesn't give people freedom. It's because people just don't want to see a situation where there's so many mass shootings. It's not that it never happens. We've had three within the last 30 years. So I don't think you could have a situation where it's 100% prevented. But why make it easier for dangerous or reckless or vulnerable people, for that matter, to get firearms? Now, take, for example, a video. In this video, the shooter is clearly vulnerable insofar as he's being bullied. You could see it in the clip. But it says the warning signs are there. So in that situation, there should be intervention. He should be getting counselling and help. And there should be intervention to address the bullying, drag the bullies before the principal, get them expelled, whatever it takes. But not letting it get to a situation where a young person feels the whole world is against him, then goes up and shoots anyone in sight, bullies or otherwise. It just, I just cannot stand this idea that there is a problem, but hey, we're not going to do anything about it because of the Second Amendment. That to me is madness. The Second Amendment could still be protected while something is done about this issue because the number of people that die in the United States by gun violence every year is staggering. I'm not saying America is the most dangerous country in the world. Far from it. I'm aware it's far further down the list than a country like Honduras, for example. But you compare the United States to most European countries, to Japan, to numerous other democracies, you simply don't have the same rate of gun violence occurring. And there are a range of factors for this, but I think common sense gun regulation is one of them. And I just don't understand why people would stand in the way of that. You know, so that's it. I spoke a bit longer here than I intended, but I wanted to say all those things. It has been a while since I made a video about the subject. I feel strongly about it, but I have a lot of American subscribers, and in a sense, I don't want to alienate my subscribers. So all I would say is, if you're a gun owner or you feel that gun regulation is all about taking away guns, I respectfully disagree. I've looked at this subject quite considerably, and I just don't see that being the case. I wouldn't support a situation where people were calling for law abiding citizens to have the guns taken away. But when I see gun extremists, and I think they're the minority, but they're very vocal, say things like, take it from my cold dead hands. I know that was Charlton Heston, but my point is there are people that really do have that mentality. Like they really do. I remember coming up to the election, I forget which state, but there were people stocking up in case Hillary became president. That to me is utter paranoia. Nothing she said in the campaign indicated that she was going to take away guns from law-abiding gun owners. So to me, there is a siege paranoid mentality going on. People say they don't want the big government dictating on this, but they seem to have no problem with the NRA indoctrinating people and scaring people and frankly spreading lies. So yeah, I think it's a very good ad, and I'm pleased it's been released. And I support the message behind it 100%. Bullying is disgusting. There needs to be intervention in that. But clearly, a troubled young person should not be getting access to guns.